be able to put a word to my condition if the law hadn't given to me an ability to do that. That's what Paul is saying when he says, I wouldn't have recognized lust for what it is, except the law says you're not to covet, and that awakens all kinds of lustful things within me. In other words, it identifies the situation that I find myself in. But the law also did something. According to the book of Galatians chapter 3, verse 24, it was actually intended to lead us to Jesus Christ, because it awakens you to the reality of your inability to be a perfect person. Now, some people in this room may have had a great desire to be as good as possible. You might have grown up with this attitude, I just want to be really a good person. Believe it or not, that's what I was like for a long time. For a long time. You know, from the time I was about 7 years old. I can remember back, actually before that, but at least 7 years old. I had made up my mind that I was going to be the best kid that any parent could have at the age of 7. And a part of the reason, I have to be honest with you as I say this, was because my mom had become ill, and I had somewhere in my own mind come to believe that if I was good, my mom would get well. And so I tried very hard to be as good as I could possibly be. And from the age of 7, 8, by the time I was 15 years old, I realized that I wasn't any good and that my mom wasn't getting any better. And I started thinking, you know, I've lost out on a lot of things that I wanted to do. And that's when I started being crazy. And that's why when I started to drink and take drugs and things like that. But for a long time, I tried to be good. Then I just became as bad as I wanted to be. And then once again, when I turned 20 years old, I started looking at what I was doing to people and how I was hurting people and ruining friendships and relationships and all. And once again, I came back to thinking, I need to be better than I am. But at that point, all I realized was I was sinful and I needed help. And that's right around the time when I was driving my Volkswagen, and I had been drinking pretty much all night, and I had pulled the shift. There's a 4-speed. I pulled the, I forget what you call that thing, the stick shift. I pulled it out of the transmission, just pulled it out. And it was in my hand in 4th gear, and I came to a stop, and I couldn't take off because it was in 4th gear. And so some guys were driving a 1965, 66 Bonneville. Some of you might remember those cars. They're as big as a boat. And they pulled up behind me. I was on Pioneer Boulevard at the intersection of Pioneer Boulevard and Firestone and in Norwalk. And they pulled up behind me, and they were loaded on reds. And so they said, can we help you? And I said, sure. So they put their bumper on my bumper and began to push me. But the guy was so loaded, he forgot to let me go until we got to the stoplight, and he stops, and I'm on my brakes trying to stop my car, but this car is so heavy that's pushing me. He's just driving, and so I went flying through the intersection, and I smashed into a signal, and then just kind of hobbled off to the side of the road. And when I pulled over to the side of the road, the whole side of this VW was smashed up, and I'm just sitting there stunned from an accident, and a car of some girls I knew pulled up behind me. And a police officer walks up to me, and he says to me, son, you better stay in your car, because if you get out of the car, I'm going to have to arrest you. Now, he was being good to me, but when the girls pulled up behind me, I had to be cool, so I climbed out of my car and walked over to them, and he ended up arresting me. So I go off to the Norwalk substation, and they put me in jail. As I'm there in jail, here comes the guy that was pushing me in the car. He got arrested at the Golden West. He was at a dance, and he's bringing reds. So he brings reds in his pocket. I'm there laying down on the ground, and he walks in, and he says, hey, what are you doing? I said, I'm here overnight. And he gives me some reds. And so we eat reds. They're in jail, and that's just that crazy memory that I thought I'd share with you for no reason whatsoever. It was at that point when I started thinking I had to do something because I'm crazy. And they took me to Los Angeles the next day. Actually took us into another city, I forget where, and then took us to L.A. and dropped me off at the L.A. County Jail. And while I was there, I sobered up. And I thought, oh, I got to get out of here. And I called a friend of mine's father. I didn't want to call my own dad, so I called a man, his name was Ed. I called Ed up and I said, Ed, can you bail me out? Because this is the third time I've been put in jail, and my dad said he's not going to bail me out if I go to jail again. And so Ed, instead of bailing me out, tells my dad.